Hey there, Poetry Freaks. Welcome to episode 10 of Poetry Freaks, the podcast. It is National Poetry Month 2025. This podcast began last summer. I work in a school, and summer 2024 was my first summer off in several years. So Poetry Freaks was born, a sister podcast to my songwriting one, Podcast in A Minor. I want to open National Poetry Month with this episode in order to introduce the Universe deck. The poet and playwright Michael McClure explained the idea of a personal universe deck for poetry writing in Volume 1 of Talking Poetics from Naropa Institute, Annals of the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics. Copyright 1978, Shambhala Press. So the Talking Poetics book contains transcripts of actual poetry classes from the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics, and I briefly touched upon this school and this universe deck exercise last June of 2024 in episode 6 of Poetry Freaks, Disembodied Poems for Wandering Ghosts. So here and now for National Poetry Month, I want to zoom in on the personal universe deck as a poetry exercise. But first, let me explain Disembodied Poetics as kind of summed up in the Wikipedia article. The goal is to challenge ideas of generic art, explore, experiment in your writing, cultivate contemplative and experimental writing practices, and create original and innovative approaches to literature. The golden mouth, the golden mind. As aforementioned last summer, Michael McClure's Talking Poetics lecture is titled Cinnamon Turquoise Leather, a Personal Universe Deck, and is dated July 17th, 1976. Please again note McClure's portrait, slim arms crossed, endless legs cloaked in flared pants. I don't have the book with me right now, but I did show it in episode 6. So check that out on YouTube, and it'll be worth your while. Everybody looked like that in the 70s. His aim in the lecture is to help us develop our own personal universe decks, as in a deck of cards, as a tool for poetry and word intimacy and some self-examination. He admits that his rules are complicated and invites those listening to the lecture in real time to ask questions if they have any. At the end of February, just this past February, I assembled my personal universe deck. But in the spirit of the rebellious side of poetry, I broke the rules, and I'll explain that after I tell you what the rules, courtesy of Michael McClure, disembodied poet and playwright, are. The personal universe deck should contain 100 words written on 100 cards. These words should exemplify your past, present, and future, and they should all sound good together. An example cited in episode 6 of Poetry Freaks: you are not allowed to use the word hamburger, says McClure, because no matter how deeply you might love hamburgers, that word doesn't sound good with anything. Okay, that sounds a little definitive and bossy, especially for a school that espouses exploration and experimentation and original approaches. This is a personal universe deck, McClure. And I won't tell him to get his own universe deck because he did create his own. If you believe in your heart of hearts that hamburger is a glorious word and will make your poetry sparkle, I say get in there. And now back to the rules from McClure. The words in your universe deck should show your good and bad side. And then he gets on to the math problem of it. It's actually a wonderful guide, I think, if you can get your head around it. Your words should be divided and conquered in this way: 16 sight, related to sight, 16 related to sound, 16 related to taste, 16 related to touch, and 16 related to smell. And that's 80 words so far. Then you need 10 for movement and 10 for abstraction. I remember reading the lecture last year and being enchanted by the word diving and horrified by what I felt like was a math problem. When the spirit took me last February, here's what I did. I wrote out 2 pages of words, stream of consciousness. McClure said they should all sound good together. I didn't sweat that. I chose words that stirred me, knowing it would work. I think I'm drawn to words of a specific lyrical or musical to me quality, and I think they'll meld just fine. McClure advised, go alone into a darkened room and make the list by candlelight to access past, present, future self, all at once. I mean, that does sound mystical, like you really could cast some poetry spell and summon the exact words that the muses would call yours. However, I wrote my list, stream of consciousness, while an episode of Criminal Minds played in the background. We'll see how that influences my universe deck. As for accessing past, present, and future, I've been focusing on writing poetry, often confessional poetry, like Jack Kerouac himself in his writing, for about 14 years. If anything, I'm preoccupied with past and present and imaginable future of myself. So I felt confident about accessing all that stuff. If you feel less confident, I encourage the dark room by candlelight. He said you can't even have your cat in there, and I wasn't sure I could keep my cat out of any room. There are not many doors she can't open. McClure emphasized the senses. The first 80 words are meant to be related to the 5 senses, and being of a sensual nature myself, the senses made their way into my deck easily enough. I'm not sure it's evenly 16, 16, 16, 16, 16 across the 5 senses, but close enough. I submit that the time spent with words and their beauty in a mindset of senses and self will not be wasted, even if we are freewheeling with the guidelines. But I have passed along the guidelines, so follow them if you like. I'm releasing this episode at the beginning of National Poetry Month to go hand in hand with my breakfast poetry live streams. For the 4th year in a row, I plan to execute a live stream every morning of April on YouTube or possibly Instagram. We shall see. And I'll put the link to my channel in the show notes. Traditionally, I follow a little formula to keep myself on track in the early hours of the day, and this year, for one thing, I'll draw 3 words a day from my personal universe deck, and these will serve as a prompt for a poem I will write and read the next morning. I love National Poetry Month for generating a body of work. Last year, I did a dice roll prompts, as in earlier episodes of Poetry Freaks as well, using words and phrases chosen and numbered beforehand. The audience is always invited to write along during Breakfast Poetry Live. You can use your own personal universe deck. You can use the words that I draw. Send me your poem, and I will gleefully read it on the live stream. And last year, our friend and poet in residence for the Dracula Society, Pete Kelly, wrote along with the prompts on the Breakfast Poetry Lives so consistently that he and I released a book of poems together called Poetry Freaks, Poems by the Dice, at the end of April of 2024. Check it out. I'm going to link it in the show notes. So let's get into the poetry zone. I encourage you to create your own personal universe deck, a la Michael McClure 1976. Draw 3 words daily and use them as prompts for your own poetry practice. You can weave the words into your new poem as you like, or simply make them the title and write to the mood it inspires. And speaking of mood, don't forget my yearly String of Pearls poem, built day by day as I draw pre-written lines from a coffee can and let the universe put the poem in order. This year's theme is food. Speaking of sensual pleasures, right? And now, just for you, the first poem of the season, prompted by the very first 3 words drawn from my personal universe deck. And those 3 words are body, fetid, squirm. And don't they sound lovely together? I told you, the universe works it out. Here we go. Body, fetid, squirm. Is it considered going mad to overhear body conversations in the gurgling of the automatic dishwasher? Or Angel's song, a squirm in the walls while the electric fans drone? Is it just as easy as that? Oh, do let me be a mad poet, fetid drain in the basement floor. Dispatch to me the missive I'll adore of just the right madness to deliver me from the deadly daily plod out of the garden and into the corridors to bleed beneath fluorescent tubes. Send me into the arms of the muse, just mad enough to be the bringer of songs. And that is Body, Fetid, Squirm. Woo! I'm pumped for National Poetry Month. So I encourage you to write along. I encourage you to join in the Breakfast Poetry Lives. I think on YouTube. I don't want to get all nail that down, but that's my plan. If not, it'll be Hipness_and_outrage on Instagram. Thank you for listening, Poetry Freaks, and happy National Poetry Month. We'll see you next time. Grab the poetry,